Happy Monday, readers. Today for Reading Workshop, you're going to need your copy of the Tiger Rising digital copy that's attached to your lesson, reading notebook, and your Tiger Rising book packet. We won't need this until a little bit later. So for today, you will not need a teach page from your green folder. You will be writing some notes, so you will need your pencil, and make sure that you remember that you can pause at any time during the video to get yourself caught up on what we're writing, and then push play when you're ready to move on. We're going to go ahead and open up to our last page that we were working on last time. We had talked about previously about how story elements are important for us to better understand the text that the author is providing for us. So we were focusing last week on setting and how the author is creating a mood and tone with what they're describing with their setting. And you were asked to follow along and find a piece of text evidence that helped you use your visualization or the movie and picture that you're making in your head to create the tone and how that might give us a better insight into how the author feels about that character, and then which senses helped you develop that understanding. We then moved on to telling the difference between character traits and physical traits. We use the acronym STEAL to help us analyze when a character says, thinks, or does something, so the actions, and how they look help us get a better insight of who the character is. We talked about specific text evidence and then telling the difference between is that a physical or character trait, and then what text evidence we actually found within that text to help support that. And then you were asked to create a flip book focusing specifically on the character of Sistine. Today we're going to be moving on. So we're going to write the next page, which is page 37. And today we're going to be creating defensible ideas about our characters. So we're going to turn back to the table of contents. And we're still in our character unit. So today's lesson is called Making Defensible Ideas about Characters. And today's date is 9-21-20. So we're going to go ahead and turn back to today's page, and we're going to actually turn our notebooks to the side so we're looking on the outside part of your page. Before we get started with what we're going to take notes on, we're going to go ahead and think about what our teaching point is today. So I'm going to tell you a little story that I want you to listen to because it's going to help us better understand how we can apply some comprehension skills to understanding who our characters are. So I have a friend that has a little boy, and the little boy's name is Evan. And when he was a little boy, his mom told me that she was waxing the floor one day, and when she was waxing, she reminded him, don't go on the floor until it's dry. Make sure you don't do that. And Evan would stand on the outside of the kitchen floor just looking inside, and as soon as she walked away, he would quickly take one toe and step on the floor, and then she would quickly find out that he didn't follow her directions. And I remember her telling me she talked to her husband about how defiant she thought Evan was being by not following her directions and doing exactly what she asked not to. But her husband is really good about reading people. So he warned her that, Evan wasn't being defiant in the way that he was just trying to do something bad, but he was just trying to figure out what he could get away with. And he just wants those little victories. And then when he became a little bit older, she said he was still basically a good kid, did his homework for the most part, came home on time, and was polite to adults. But one day he walked through their door with a stripe in his hair, a blonde stripe when he had dark black hair right down the middle. And then she said that she talked to her husband again, pointing out that, Evan was doing something again that she told him not to do. But her husband, because he's so good at reading people, he said, you know what? He's still basically a good kid. He wasn't really trying to defy her, but he was trying once again to see what he could get away with. So we are going to be thinking about how our actions give us a better insight of who we are. Or reading people, how can we look at the actions that others take to give us a better insight about who they are and developing our ideas about that. Today, I want to teach you that to read people in life and in stories, readers notice when a person does or says something that stands out and think, why might the character have acted this way? Or what does the actions show about that character? And readers especially notice patterns in a character's action and notice times when the character breaks the pattern. So I'm going to have us reread a passage that we have previously read together because I want us to think about it. How is the character acting and what patterns have I seen in the way this character acts? Does this new action fit with or disrupt those patterns? So we're going to look in our text and look back at pages 5 and 6. So that is the beginning of chapter 2. So you can look at your digital copy or you can listen along with Mrs. Ling's video. So we're looking closely at pages 5 and 6. And before we talk about why a character acts the way he does, it helps us to remember what we know about the character. So we're going to look back and remind ourselves about what we were thinking about Rob from chapter 1. So we're going to look back at the beginning of the book. And when we think back at the beginning of the book, we were first introduced to Rob when he was standing outside the Kentucky Star Motel. And we already knew by reading this information that Rob hasn't cried since his mother died. And we also know that Rob has a way of not thinking about things. He packs those things in his life that are upsetting in what we call like a suitcase, and he shuts it tight. And he had even mentioned that he wants the tiger to sit on top of that suitcase so it doesn't open and he doesn't have to feel those things. So we're going to read into chapter 5 and think about Rob's actions as he boards the bus and see if those fit with what we already know about him and if we are noticing any new patterns in his actions. So I want you to think about during this time when I'm reading, why? Why is Rob acting or doing the things that he's doing? So we're going to look at the beginning, and it says, "Looky here," said Norton Threemonger as soon as Rob stepped onto the school bus. "It's a Kentucky Star. How's it feel to be a star?" Norton stood in the center of the aisle, blocking Rob's path. Rob shrugged. It's hard not to think about Norton and his actions in this particular part, isn't it? But let's focus on Rob. His action's a little bit smaller and less obvious, but it's not much of an action, is it? We just see the author said he shrugged. What do you make of it? I want you to think about why he would have shrugged. Rob shrugged. "Oh, he don't know," Norton called to his brother. "Hey, Billy, he don't know what it's like to be a star." Rob slipped past Norton. He walked all the way to the back of the bus and sat down in the last seat. I want us to stop right there and think, what do we know so far about Rob? The book really hasn't told us anything. Really? Or wait, maybe it has. Are you thinking that the actions that characters make, the way Rob moves to the back of the bus, are here for a reason? Maybe the back of the bus is the worst place to sit, so that makes it interesting that Rob heads right back there, doesn't it? Why does he go there? Others, though, think that the back of the bus is where the cool kids sit, and that makes it even more interesting that Rob heads there. You see how the littlest detail, the littlest actions that at first seem insignificant actually get us wondering about that character? I have other questions too. When Norton begins mocking Rob and Rob just shrugs, what's going on? Sometimes when I'm thinking about what an action shows, it helps to think about what a character could have done but didn't do. I know that every action a character makes is a choice. I want you to stop and I want you to think about why you think that he's made this choice. Some of you might be thinking that he's working really hard to avoid any sort of conflict with Norton. And then maybe somebody else is thinking about how maybe he's trying to go where he thinks that they won't follow. We're going to create a chart that's going to help us build our ideas to make defensible ideas about our character's actions and what they reveal about our character. So in your notebook, we're going to go ahead and create a chart. At the top, we're going to very carefully write today's title. So making defensible ideas about characters. And we're going to go ahead and draw a line from the left side all the way over to the right side because we're going to create some columns. So we're going to create 4 columns. The first column, it doesn't have to be too large because it's going to be titled Character. So this is where we're going to list the character that we're looking at. The next section is going to be the actions that are provided in our text evidence. Then we're going to be asking ourselves the question of why might they act like this? So this is when we're thinking about their actions and seeing what this might reveal about who they are as a character. And then the last part is, does this develop a pattern that we're seeing for this character and the way that they're acting? So any kind of patterns. So we had just talked about Rob, and this is very small action of how he was encountering the boys that were on the bus. So we're going to start by writing Rob's name first, and we're going to split this into 2 sections because we're going to be focusing on 2 different characters and some actions that we see. The first that we talked about was on page 5 and 6. And when we were talking about his actions, we made note of when he shrugged. So I'm going to put a little dash to indicate that's my first part of the action. And then the second part is when he walked all the way to the back of the bus. And sat down in the last seat. So we were making note of the character that we're focusing on, the action that the character has done, and then what this might reveal about our character. So I want you to think about who Rob is, and we're going to continue reading into this next statement. So looking back at the text, we're going to continue reading. It says, Hey, said Billy Threemonger, you know what? This ain't Kentucky. This is Florida. He followed Rob and sat down right next to him. He pushed his face so close that Rob could smell his breath. It was bad breath. It smelled metallic and rotten. You ain't a Kentucky star, Billy said, his eyes glowing under the brim of his John Deere hat. You sure ain't a star here in Florida. You ain't a star nowhere. Okay, said Rob. So we're going to stop right there and we're going to continue to think about, why do we think that Rob shrugged when he first encountered the boys? And why did he walk all the way to the back of the bus? So we have to think about, what does this reveal about who our character is and what we already know? So thinking back at our chapter 1, when we talked about that he's not cried since his mother's passed away, and how he likes to not think about things that are upsetting, keep them locked in a suitcase that is closed nice and tight. So these start telling us a little bit more about who our character is. So we might write, he thinks they won't follow him there. And when we think about what does this reveal about our character, we can think about, well, what actions did they not take? So if he encountered these boys and they were kind of picking on him and making fun of him, he chose to walk away and to go somewhere else. Some of the actions that he could have taken were possibly maybe having an argument with them or pushing them or fighting them because they're upsetting him. But he avoided them. So we're saying he thinks that they won't follow him there. And this also helps us to start thinking maybe he's putting distance between them to avoid more of a confrontation and maybe he doesn't want to stand up to them. This could also maybe reveal that maybe he's afraid. So he's afraid. So we're trying to think of the actions that the author is telling us the character is doing, but we as readers have to analyze why we think that the action is being taken by this particular character. So we have to see, what does it reveal about our character based on what actions they are not doing. And then what patterns are we starting to develop because of these ideas? So we might say that maybe this is just some more evidence that when he feels something, that might upset him. He acts like it doesn't bother him or ignores it. So we thought about our character Rob and the actions that he's taking when he first encounters those two mean boys on the bus. And as we are analyzing what actions he did take, we think about, well, what actions he didn't take, and what does this reveal about who our character is? And then we use that information that is revealing us about who the character is based on their actions. We start to develop patterns about our characters. So this helps us to create what we call a defensible idea. We're using text evidence or information that's going to support developing an idea about who the character is. We're going to look at our next character, and this time we're going to analyze Sistine. Remember that today we learned not just that readers look closely at a character's actions, but they especially look at the patterns in the person's actions and at the breaks from those patterns. Are you seeing a pattern forming in Rob's actions? You might be thinking, I can't believe he just takes it all and he just sits there and he must be feeling something, but he acts like he's feeling nothing. Readers, when we want to read a person, in this case Rob, we note the actions the person has made and then think to ourselves what those actions reveal. We think about what other choices Rob could have made in that situation and ask ourselves why he did what he did. And we look for those patterns, or like the way he keeps ignoring Norton. Before we move on to our next character that we're going to analyze, Sistine, we're going to turn the page and we're going to create an anchor chart of information. The anchor chart is going to help us when we use this during our independent reading and how we can grow ideas as a reader. So at the top, I want you to write your next topic, grow ideas about a character. And today we're paying close attention to how we can note patterns in the character's actions, period. And we use these to form ideas about the character. A second focus was, how do the characters new actions fit with / change those ideas? And then the third point that we were focusing on are why might the character act like this? So remember, we are focusing on how can we grow ideas about a character by focusing on these 3 points today. We're making note of patterns in the character's actions and using them to form ideas about that character. How do the character's new actions fit with or change those ideas? And why might the character act like this? So what does the information reveal about our character? Remember, you can pause the video so you can finish writing your notes and then push play when you're ready to continue. We're going to go head back to our chart on how to make a defensible idea about a character. We've already analyzed Rob and one of the actions that he showed us in the beginning of chapter 3 on page 5 and 6. And now we're going to be focusing on Sistine. So we're going to be looking back in our text. Remember, you have your digital copy that you can use, or you can listen to Mrs. Ling with hers. And we're going to be looking at the beginning of chapter 3 at Sistine. And I want you to think of, do her actions and the pattern of actions fit with or change our ideas about Sistine? Nobody wore pink lacy dresses to school. Nobody. Even Rob knew that. He held his breath as he watched the girl walk down the aisle of the bus. Here was somebody even stranger than he was sure. "Hey," Norton called, "this is a school bus." "I know it," the girl said. Her voice was gravelly and deep, and the words sounded clipped and strange, like she was stamping each one of them out with a cookie cutter. "You're all dressed to go to a party," Billy said. "This ain't the party bus." He elbowed Rob in the ribs. Are you asking yourself as a reader, why might she act like this? I want you to think about your thoughts. "Ha!" Norton laughed. He gave Rob a friendly thud on the head. The girl stood in the center of the aisle, swaying with the movement of the bus. She stared at them. "It's not my fault you don't have good clothes," she said finally. She sat down and put her back to him. Reader, I want you to think about for a moment why you think that she's acting the way she is. Some of you might think that Sistine seems pretty tough. Some of you even might have compared her to Rob, noting that her actions make her seem less afraid of Norton and Billy than Rob seems to be. You might also have thought she decided to wear a fancy party dress because she's confident and doesn't care what other people think. I want you to remember, when we read with intensity, and that you must read with alertness, remembering that the details in a book are there on purpose. And details like the fact that a character sits at the back of the bus or shrugs repeatedly, those matter. And we've been studying some details to grow our seed thinking. And I want us to start thinking about how we can ground those ideas to create our defensible ideas about who our characters are. And we're going to be talking about what those facts reveal. We're going to go back to our chart and we're going to start creating the defensible ideas of who we think Sistine is as a character based on her actions. So within that text evidence that we just read, we were looking at pages 8 and 9. And some of the text evidence that we're going to use is that she wore a pink lacy dress. And then a second piece is going to be a little bit longer, so make sure you have enough room. It's when she walked down the aisle of the bus, period. She spoke with a gravelly and deep voice. And I'm going to put a quotation of something that she said to Norton and Billy. So we're going to write the quotation, "It's not my fault you don't have good clothes." period, end of the quotation mark. And the last little bit was that she sat down with her back to them. So we're going to write sat with her back to them. So these are just pieces of evidence of the way that Sistine has acted when she first got in the bus and she encountered Billy and Norton compared to the way that Rob encountered the boys. So we have to start thinking about, well, what actions did she not take? What could she have done? Well, the first is maybe she would have worn something a little bit different. Maybe more of what the average kiddo going to school out in kind of like the country area. So maybe some jeans or some shorts and a t-shirt. Maybe she wouldn't have stood out as much. Maybe when she spoke to people that she's never met before, she could have maybe reacted a little bit differently. Instead of speaking with a gravelly and deep voice, maybe she would have had a friendlier tone, or maybe, even was offended by the way that they were speaking to her and making fun of her wearing a dress. Maybe your thoughts were, well, if that happened to me, I would have probably cried. I might wanted to get off the bus and run home because, I was so upset that I was brand new and these boys were already kind of being so mean and nasty to me. And then when she sat down with her back to them, maybe this is something that she did because she didn't want to show them her tears, or maybe she didn't want to find someone to sit with. So now we have to think about these actions and then what this might reveal about who Sistine is as a character, or why she's acted the way she has. So we said that maybe she wore a fancy dress because she's confident. And doesn't care what other people think about her. We might also start thinking of, is this a pattern, the way that she's first encountering the boys and then what she says to them. So this might kind of tell us that she could seem like she's pretty tough. And let's put she's pretty tough. Her actions compared to Rob make her seem less afraid of the boys. So remember, as readers, we have to create defensible ideas about our characters by grounding those ideas as ideas that come straight from text evidence. But as readers, we consistently ask ourselves, why did the character act the way they have? Why did the character say what they said to the other characters? And this will help us start to develop patterns of who our character is and the motivations for why they're acting the way they are. Today, you're going to be listening to the news section of our Tiger Rising. So after you're done for our lesson, you're going to be listening to chapters 11 through 15, and you are to start working on the next few pages of your book packet. Today, you can start working on the vocabulary on page 9. Remember to label your page numbers so you know which page numbers we're referring to. So page 9 and page 10, you can start working on. And then tomorrow, you can finish up with page 11 and 12. The last thing that you're going to do today during your read aloud time is going to take your book packet test on chapters 1 through 10. Remember, you can use your book packet as an open note test, and it helps that you have already completed all of the pages for the first 8 pages. So pages for chapters 1 through 10.